Superman came out on July 11th, and as of today, it has officially been 1 week since film release, which is my personal version of where the spoiler ban ends. Every time I try to find somebody's like specific point for a spoiler ban, it's always pushed. Some group is always pushing it slightly further, and I understand not everybody can see the movie right away. My personal opinion on it is usually I'll wait a week and then we'll post it. Those of you who saw me on stream on July 11th, you know I did not make it to release night. However, I was able to see the movie during release weekend, which is usually my window that I try to hit most of these superhero films. And if you watch the streams, you know I'm a huge superhero fan, and I'm also very easy to please. But when I say that this is one of the best superhero movies we've had in such a long time, I genuinely am not exaggerating. Before we get into this, I want to stress two things. Number one, I'm not a film expert or a critic, and I'm not reviewing the movie from a standpoint of somebody who has an opinion that matters that much. I just love superhero films, and I've always talked about them on stream. I feel like Superman is a perfect place to start when we put them on the main channel here, because I am getting back to posting more on this channel. I'll talk about that a little bit at the end. I'm not a superhero expert, I'm not a Marvel expert, I'm not a DC expert. Check back with me in 2 years, we'll see if it's still the same. I've just been very fortunate to grow up with these superhero stories, and so seeing Superman again on the big screen after all this time, and I know Man of Steel, it technically wasn't that long ago, but it's been a long time since we've had a Superman like this, and I'll get into what I mean by that in just a second. Now, before I tear into this movie from beginning to end, I wanted to say, if you're interested in superhero stuff, both Marvel and DC, or if you're a fan of gaming and stuff, feel free to subscribe here on the main channel here at VictoryTGH, and check out my streams on VictoryTGH on Twitch, where we've been playing a majority of superhero-based games over the last couple years on stream, which you can check out on the second channel, Victory Live. I have Suicide Squad, we have most of the Batman Arkham series, and every stream you can catch me playing Marvel Rivals, which I love to death. When it comes to the things I'm super passionate about, is like video games, superheroes, and then like, I don't know, anime, Power Rangers, Transformers, all that stuff down there. But one of the things that made me want to talk about this movie from beginning to end is that we've got more Marvel movies coming out, such as Fantastic Four, which comes out literally in a couple weeks. Anyway, enough about that. Let's go ahead and talk about Superman, yeah? So immediately the movie opens with the text 3 centuries ago. First superpowered beings known as metahumans appeared on Earth, right? Then we go 3 decades ago, 3 years ago, 3 weeks ago, 3 hours ago, which is a really interesting thing that I didn't expect them to open the movie with. Especially the end bit that kicks you. It's the 3 minutes ago Superman lost a fight for the first time. I went into this Superman movie expecting and wanting only a few things, right? I wanted a huge upturn in terms of positivity from what we'd experienced in the previous, like, I guess Snyderverse would be what you would call it. Those of you who have seen Morning Madness, the 2021 podcast that is on my main channel and is on Spotify or all podcast platforms, it still exists, the Morning Madness podcast 2021. It was for that year, has not gone since, but those episodes are still gold, so go ahead and check them out. It's the most opinionated talking I've done online in a long time aside from streams, right? But a few times here and there we've touched on the Snyderverse when it was happening and when it was a big talking point, especially around the Justice League time. And while I don't know, and I don't know if I ever voiced this on podcast, but my big thing was I didn't dig how dark and gloomy the modern DC stuff was, right? It didn't make sense to me, especially for Superman, right? So opening with something as bleak as Superman just lost a fight and he is now writhing on the ground in pain, coughing up blood, is a very, very strong beginning, right? I didn't expect it to be more dark and gloomy or dark and gritty shit. I had seen the bit of him laying in the ice from the trailers, which are inevitable. It is inevitable to come across something in the trailers leading up to a superhero movie coming out, which is something I'll talk about later at the end of the video because it's really important and it pisses me off. But very quickly, we're given the establishing exposition that skips over the entire origin for Superman, which is great. It really gives you the feeling of, one, they're not treating you like you're stupid. You know Superman. If you're here, you know you like Superman, you know the story. And for those of you who don't, it's not super hard to catch it, fill in those blanks, because the blanks that the bits that they give you are enough. But it also feels very much like turning to the first page of a comic book, and I'm sure other people have said this, but you know, you can imagine the white text boxes going across the screen as they start with those texts in it. 3 centuries ago, 3 decades ago, 3 years ago, you know, so on and so forth. And it just genuinely feels like you're entering a story as it's going on, right? Like you're not there to see the kid be born first like every other movie, right? Which is awesome. I loved that. It was great to jump right into it, and it also gets us to more action quicker. And then immediately we're introduced to Crypto, who was also part of the marketing as well, but getting to see him stampeding through the snow was something that I managed to avoid leading up. I don't know if it was in any of the advertising material, but it was an awesome scene to see. They make it look so easy to make a dog look super powerful like that. and the CGI on like him traveling through the snow, and even just the way that they treat the weight of his movements and the weight of like him hitting Clark or like pouncing on him is great. I do love that they treated Crypto like a dog all the way throughout, and I like that that's like the vibe they're going for, is that like he very much is still a dog. As smart as Crypto usually is, it's great that he's still a young dog, right? The explanation that they give us at the end is great. I just went into it assuming he was young. He's super young, so he's super disobedient. Moving to the next thing that I was amazed by was the Fortress of Solitude, which looks amazing in this movie. A huge crystalline structure that looks very similar to some of the designs we've seen previously in the more modern comics, ever since they adapted like this Fortress of Solitude's look, and I love it. It looks great. Apparently, a lot of the internals were practically done with a lot of resin, which is really cool. I think that's sick. A lot of the stuff that they did that was practical in this movie was great, and even the stuff that was CG looked really good too. Of course, next we're introduced to the Superman robots, which are awesome. James Gunn talked a lot about his inspirations being All-Star Superman and Kingdom Come for like his light inspirations for bits that he wanted to take and put into this universe of Superman. And it's cool just to see him take stuff that like that he liked and to know where it's coming from. Somebody might look at it and go, well, where did they come from? He didn't build them as a baby, did he? Right? But who cares? Who cares? During the healing sequence, we get our first bit of like pure sunlight shot, which I think is really cool. And it's like one of the few only bits of shot technique I'll talk about, because it's one of those things that you really notice. It wasn't until like the third or fourth time where they showed direct sunlight into the camera where I was like, oh, okay, this is a deliberate choice, and I think I understand what they're doing with it now. But we get to see Clark heal up, and then he's immediately back out to do his job. The thing that I was immediately thinking about going into this that was going to make or break how this movie was going to go was the first time we see Flight, right? Before the movie, there was the trailer for the second part of Wicked, and there was a scene, which I assume is towards, it could be at any point in the movie, where Elphaba is on her broom and flying, and it looks not unlike the end of Harry Potter, Prisoner of Azkaban? Is it? Is that the one? I just checked. Yes, it is Prisoner of Azkaban. And so going into it, my mind was immediately on, okay, how do they plan on doing the flight in this movie? And the night before watching the Superman, I went and watched the Super/Man Christopher Reeve documentary, like which I really enjoyed, and I really think if you're a big fan of superheroes, or like a big fan of Superman as a character, or as a fan of movies in general, or big moments in Hollywood history or something like that, or people who made a big impact, check it out. It's a really good documentary. And one of the small things they talked about when they were first getting Superman done in the first movie was making Flight look right. And that was just one of those things that was ringing in my head going into this movie, right? Safe to say they do an amazing job with the flight in this movie. Invincible does a really good job of explaining this type of flight. It genuinely does feel like Superman has full control of his momentum at any point in the air at any time. And the flight still feels like it has friction and resistance to it. It is so good in the way that speedster running in Eternals is good. In that it's hard to always do right, and people can do speedsters and flight often, but it's hard to make it look so good that you go, I like that. That is good. And the movie did an amazing job of like checking off all those boxes I had immediately on start, which is awesome. Once those expectations are checked off and blown out of the water and we're good to go, the movie just kicks into gear, and we get an awesome fight against him, between him and the Hammer of Baravia, who, let me double check, because I think this happened. The Hammer of Baravia, and one thing that I did see before I saw the movie was the slightest headline. The headline said that like the pop figure for Hammer of Baravia and the pop figure for Ultraman, right, were like or like the pop figure for Hammer of Baravia had spoiled something, right? Which, it sucks that things spoil these movies so often. Again, I'm going to talk about trailers at the end of this. It is so hard to get into these movies without having something spoiled. But again, even the smallest spoilers to me matter so much. They do an amazing job of establishing like Lex and Luthor Corp's abilities very early on. There's nothing that he can do, even though he can enter a pocket dimension and, warp across space, that feels out of the ordinary that doesn't feel like that doesn't feel believable for him to be able to do, you feel like this Lex Luthor is that smart and that he has this access, and of course he would be able to do these things, which is awesome. I say it's so long since we've had a Lex Luthor to this level, but I don't think we've ever had a live action Lex Luthor to this level. The most recent Lex Luthor I've dealt with was the one in Suicide Squad Kill the Justice League, who feels this competent. It is really cool to see this character come to life and feel like I can actually believe this character is him. He feels like Lex Luthor, and that's an amazing job. I wasn't familiar with Nicholas Holt's previous roles or anything like that, so I went into it with a complete clean slate and no expectations. Same with David Cornsweet and a majority of this cast, actually. So his performance blew me out of the water, and I was amazed by it. This opening fight immediately establishes that Lex has a really good understanding of Clark's fighting style. It showcases a great combo of, like, what you find out later on is equal strength with Superman and then just a slightly better brain, which is awesome. Not a slightly better brain, a significantly better brain. The end of this fight also does a great job of establishing little bits and pieces of the Metropolis citizens when Superman is in the ground after the fight. It's just a tiny little bit of character interactions you get, but the character that interacts with Superman, who becomes important later, is really good. It just feels like a realistic character who would be there if they idolize a hero. The scenes do a great job of reminding you of like the Raimi Spider-Man's New York, or of course any of the Spider-Man's New York, but specifically the you mess with one of us, you mess with all of us scene from Spider-Man 1. Spider-Man 2. And then we get to check off arguably my last box on the list, which is Clark Kent. David Cornsweet does an amazing job at establishing the awkward body language that Clark Kent needs, which is something that Christopher Reeve also did a great job with. I later found out both of them went to the same acting school. Whether or not that played a part into it, I don't know, but that's what people bring up every time they talk about it. From the shot I saw of him in the trailer with a different hairstyle, like the curls being down and stuff like that, it was a really good, just different face instantly anyway, and his acting does a great job of carrying the rest. His clothes look oversized, which is really good, and the way he talks isn't too nerdy. He's not afraid to talk like a normal person, which is great, and we get to meet a lot of the other members of the Daily Planet, which another thing in this movie which I thought was really cool is it's amazing just how many characters in all of these like room shots, both in the Daily Planet and in Luthor Corp, who are all named characters. They're all characters who have something going on with them, and they're all like when you go through the credits, they all have names. Even people you don't recognize in the Luthor Corp building are characters who have names in comics. Like, it's really interesting, and I like that. It'd be like if the Helicarrier in Avengers 1 was full of S.H.I.E.L.D. agents who were all named. Like, it's just not something I don't think you could do. This is also the first time we meet who I argue is one of the other biggest heroes of the movie, which is Jimmy Olsen. He is amazing in this movie. Skylar Gisondo, who I think I know most from playing young Sean in Psych, is an awesome actor for Jimmy, does a great job of playing who seems to be would be a great small level best friend for Clark. But also, it took me a while to understand what they were establishing in this movie, which is that like Jimmy is a ladies' man, which is so interesting. It's like a plot point that becomes super relevant, but it's just really funny, and they don't make it obnoxious either, I don't think. It's played in the right way to where it doesn't make him any worse of a character, and it doesn't make any of the characters around him any less of a character either necessarily, which is awesome. And of course, then we meet Lois, who's played by Rachel Brosnahan. I almost said voiced by, like she's not. Who was an exceptional standout in this movie for me. We'll talk about her portrayal as Lois more in a second because there's plenty more that she does in the movie. But we're gonna move on to one of my favorite bits in the movie. Before we get to that scene that I love so much, we do get a small scene with Lex Luthor meeting with leaders, including Rick Flag from Suicide Squad, who is still the same actor. I do love that James Gunn is committed to keeping the same actors both in voice and in live action all the way throughout, and it makes it feel really interesting because there was never a point where it was too much attention drawn to him, but it was just cool that if you knew who he was, you saw him, and like I did, and you lit up and you're like, oh, okay, cool, he's here. It feels connected. Which I did a couple more times when other characters popped up as well and made the world feel more interconnected. It was great. That's one of the best parts about this movie, and I'll talk about that when we get to the Justice Gang. Immediately after we leave the Daily Planet, there's the scene between Clark and Lois, where Clark is making dinner for Lois, talking about how 3 months ago they started seeing each other. But the part that I want to talk about more is the interview portion. The dialogue between Lois and Clark in this scene does such a good job of, again, allowing Clark to feel more human and not overly nerdy. And of course, an issue we had with Man of Steel was he was a bit more unnecessarily stoic as well. It is easy to see why Clark is getting flustered in this scene, in the interview scene when they're going back and forth, and it is realistic to see Lois keep pressing him because it's 100% in her character to interview him that way. Both of them are right in the argument. It feels good to see where Clark is coming from and watch him almost in his own head realize bits and pieces of why he might have acted a bit too rashly or a bit too quickly. But you can also see that it's coming from a place of wanting to help, and it's awesome. It is just awesome to see the more humane amount of emotion to him. He has a breaking point, like not even necessarily a breaking point, but he has moments of emotional ramp up, right? And it doesn't, he's not perfect, and that's obviously a whole point of the movie. But as they were going back and forth against each other in the interview section, I actually did lean over to my girlfriend in the theater and I went, "This is good." Like, and I don't usually, that's not usually a comment I'll give comments throughout the movie all the time, but never usually "this is good." Like that's a very specific, very generic comment. But she got what I meant. The dialogue felt real, it felt weighted, it felt good, and that's something we haven't had always. Sometimes the dialogue doesn't always feel the tightest in a lot of, especially recent MCU movies. I am one of those people who does not subscribe to the fact that writing in superhero movies has been bad necessarily, and I especially don't subscribe to the argument that comedy in superhero movies has been bad. That is a huge red flag for somebody who just doesn't understand superheroes on a conceptual level. And I say this on stream, if you are going to die on a daily basis, it no longer becomes a super serious situation. You're allowed to joke about it. And that scales up. So the less likely you are to die or for your death to not matter, a la Thor, the more room you have to joke. But that's to say, there's not that much offhand humor in this movie anyways. And then we get a nice little small hint at the end of this argument where it's like a bit of Clark's emotional commitment issues, right? Which is a fun little bit of another thing where he's not perfect, right? He can handle physical conflict fine, but emotional conflict, he's not quite there yet, which is great, right? And so because of this, when he should necessarily maybe try to reassure or comfort Lois at the end, he just leaves, right? And that's because obviously he doesn't know everything he needs to do yet, especially not in relationships, right? Because this Clark might not have had any relationships at all. And then we get one of the best establishing scenes for a villain ever, even though we've already seen him a bit. Storming the Fortress of Solitude is one of the coolest Lex Luthor scenes ever, as they tear through the Superman robots and everything goes flying across the room, and Lex just keeps walking while stuff's flying past his face, like literally directly in front of him. And it's super easy to do, but it felt so cool. Not like it hasn't been done before, but they just made it seem so good. And also another thing about this Lex Luthor, another thing that they do so good with him is he's just so bald. He's just so bald, and it's so right. Like Nicholas Hoult had hair, he had good hair, but they do such a good job of making him bald. It's so important too. The engineer, who is an awesome character who I wasn't super familiar with before this, has some awesome scenes, and also when she's hacking into the computer, she gets this awesome energy being shape to her that's so sick. It was such an awesome bit of imagery. I loved it. Everything they did with her nanotech felt real and weighted, and I loved it. Which is, of course, obviously a big argument against nanotech in previous superhero movies has been that it doesn't look very good. They do a really good job of making these nanites feel real. It's like the Big Hero 6 nanobites, like the nanobots, where they're like a physical thing. They feel like chains in a chain link fence. It's really good. This was a moment in the movie where I realized that my own understanding of comics just immediately allowed me to blind myself to this fact, right? But my girlfriend leaned over to me in the theater and said, "How did he get that to come out of the ground?" And so in my head, I'm immediately going, "Oh, well, he probably he probably scanned Superman's DNA and probably just has something that emits his DNA signal, or he probably scanned him during that fight with the Hammer of Barovia, and the goal was to use the DNA to open the door, right?" Later, we get the reveal with Ultraman, obviously, that it's a clone, so that's the DNA key that they're using to get into the fortress. but I didn't quite put two and two together there yet at all, because he just wasn't even in my thoughts as being like, right, because when I think of a Superman clone, I think Bizarro before I think Ultraman. Ultraman I think is a similar but separate character, right? So while he's there, it's not like I forget that he's even a part of it necessarily, because he doesn't do a lot, and you focus on on Lex and the engineer so much, you don't even think that it would be Ultraman opening the door. It's great, it's really good. But I had completely wrote it off. I was like, oh yeah, he's Lex, he's smart, he can get in there, it doesn't even matter. But yeah, that is a plot point that becomes important later, and I'm glad that she brought that up to me, because I never would have thought about it. At the same time, we get a scene of Luthor Corp releasing a mini kaiju into the city, which is super cool. He looks awesome. He's a little axolotl creature when he's tiny, and then they say he'll grow, and then he's huge, building size. This is the fight that I'm aware made it into a lot of advertisement, but I was very lucky to avoid a lot of it. So seeing this fight in its entirety felt so good. And the fact that it's a fight that you know Superman can win, because that's never a question. It is so good to see that the focus is on him minimizing damage and saving people. The moment he flew to behind the kaiju to stop him from hitting the building and smashing into it, even the tiniest bit, I shook my girlfriend's arm so heavily in the chair, because that is something that I hated from Man of Steel that I didn't even know I disliked. Right, until way later. It's one of those things where like something felt off, and then later on I see other people make that critique, and I'm like, you know what, yeah, that is insane, that the massive amounts of damage that Superman causes, and they do such a good job rectifying it. It felt like an immediate fuck you to the previous movies the moment he started focusing on minimizing damage, and it was so satisfying to see. Couple of notable scenes: Superman digging under the ground like Venture in Overwatch looked really sick. I thought that was awesome. And then and at this point in the fight is where we finally meet the Justice Gang, which is Guy Gardner, played by Nathan Fillion, Isabella Merced as Hawkgirl, and Eddie Gathegi as Mr. Terrific. All three of these characters look awesome, even though Guy looks a little jarring. Again, this might be one of those meta things, but obviously if you know who Nathan Fillion is, seeing him as Guy Gardner might feel a little weird, but he does such a good job in this role, playing this asshole character, and he's great. I'd be happy to see him again multiple times. And I know we might get to see him in Lanterns, which is coming soon. I'm not too sure about what the plot is there. I've been trying to avoid that as well. But if he's in there, I'd be so happy to see more of him. We get to see a little bit of each of the Justice Gang do their thing at first, and it's a great introduction to the few of them. Seeing Hawkgirl like start stabbing the eye of the kaiju is a little gross, and it did make me cringe a little. But you have to remember, James Gunn loves that shit, so we'll probably see a lot of it moving forward. And it also just separates a different thing. The DC universe is slightly more gritty and grotesque than the Marvel universe, which is something that I've always known. You know, that was one of the things growing up, where it's like DC is just slightly darker and grittier. That's the difference, right? They do a great job of sprinkling in a little bit of Mr. Terrific here in this fight, but he does so much later on in the movie. It's so good. I can't wait to talk about him in a second. Hold on. Obviously, he uses his T-spheres to kill the kaiju by blowing him up from the inside, which obviously Superman doesn't like, which is another cool thing. It's really cool that Superman wanted to go for a non-lethal thing. He later goes on to say, like, we could have relocated him to an intergalactic zoo or whatever, which is just a cool thing, because it is something that Superman would say. It is something that he would say. Because I feel like and while I can't say that for certain, I feel like I've heard him make that suggestion in some sort of Justice League capacity before, in whatever way that could have been. And then, of course, we get the big news story where Lex translated the Kryptonian, which I understand is doable, but is weird considering there's not a lot of language to work with. But it very easily could have, like in my head, in the world we live in now, it could have very easily just been an AI generated translation. It's a real translation, apparently, from Kryptonian to English. But getting to see the second half of getting to see the second half of the video, I was convinced for a second that it was like, it was fabricated. But at the same time, this being a portion of Superman's original origin, or like Superman's original origin in this universe, is really cool. It's really cool to get to see him fight against, like his shattered sense of self in that moment, which is kind of more important than what everybody else is thinking about it, really. Like that takes the back seat, right? It's more of the self feeling about now knowing that is a completely different purpose you were sent to Earth for, right? And he does a good job of focusing on that. He doesn't really care as much about what other people are thinking right now at the moment necessarily. It's more on him. I think it's a really good I think it's a really good natural way for him to realize, like, oh yeah, where did they get the footage from? And then immediately off to the fortress, because of course, there's only one place you can get it, right? And then we do spend a good little time here with the president of Barovia, who does his speech and then walks into where his like little painting of himself on a horse is that takes him to his portal to Lex's pocket dimension, where he finally explains how it works. And the whole time I'm sitting there trying to, oh, they're doing donuts outside, and I can't figure out where. And the entire time in my head, I was wondering if it's a Phantom Zone or not, and I didn't want to say anything. I was also getting it mixed up with the Negative Zone from Fantastic Four. I did have them right, I just didn't want to say it and sound like an idiot, which is weird because I'm saying it to my girlfriend who doesn't know which either of those are necessarily, so it didn't really matter in the first place. But they never really just established it is just a pocket dimension that Lex has, which I guess, to be fair, there's a couple of pocket dimensions in this universe right now, apparently, so it's okay, apparently. But we start to get a tiny little taste of Lex's little pocket dimension, and then Superman makes it to the Fortress of Solitude, where his robot is stabbing himself repeatedly in the head, which it almost seems like that was the only thing keeping the robot alive. So the moment Superman stopped him from doing that, he gave him like 5 seconds to live. So honestly, if he had just left him alone, he might have been okay. And then of course, the moment he realizes Krypto's gone, what else would you expect, right? Straight off to Luthor Corp and immediately threatening him over the dog, which is not unrealistic. Most unbelievably paragonal nice people are willing to lose their shit when a dog gets involved, right? So it was not unbelievable in any capacity, and it was great to see how he cared about care about Krypto the way that you would expect him to. And of course, that's caught on video by Eve, and goes on to we move on to one of what is my second, if not most favorite scene in the movie. Which I know a lot of my favorite scenes just happen to be while it's more Clark and Lois-y than it is Superman, which is great. But the scene where he arrives back to his house or apartment, or whatever it is, and in the background we get the interdimensional imp fight that the Justice Gang are having in the background. That immediately establishes so much more for this universe, and establishes just how different this universe is from the MCU in just the right ways. The big difference is that there are constantly comic book things happening in this universe. That was a thing that people questioned all the time. Why is Daredevil doing shit and Spider-Man's never shown up once? You know, shit like that, right? And we get that here. We don't see a close-up or a zoom in or a cut to once of that fight in the background. We just see them doing their own thing and know that they've got it. And that is something that happens all the time in the universe, because of course these superheroes are around and not helping all the time, because there's stories where they just don't show up. And that explains it. And it feels so good to see something like that, because we know moving forward that can open the door for more stuff where it's just like, oh yeah, when they say in Endgame where it's like, where's Captain Marvel? It's like, oh, Off-World. It's like, that feels so much more believable now if we have stuff constantly going on in the background. And that's just a small little thing that adds to it so much. And then as they embrace, we get to see Guy drag the imp off into space, and it looks really cool. It gives them a nice background, but to me, it just looks funny getting to watch him drag him off into space with a giant net. And then Superman turns himself in and is taken to the pocket dimension, where we are met with Element Man, who I was not aware was advertised for this movie. Because I had been avoiding advertisement for this movie, I did not see any advertisement for Metamorpho in this movie whatsoever. So it was supremely exciting to see this character be introduced in a way that blindsided me. I know of Metamorpho, but I'm not an expert in any sense. So I've seen him maybe once or twice. Introducing him as Element Man, right, does a great job of keeping the people who know the name but can't necessarily attach it to the face yet blind for just long enough to get to the scenes later where you're like, oh yeah, he can do other shit too. But we'll get to that in just a second. Superman is then taken through more of Lex's pocket dimension, and we get to see some of my favorite little bits of Lex. One of my favorite additive character details they added was just how petty Lex Luthor is, right? This scene that I've seen some people make like critique for being like nonsensical humor or something like that is when you get to the monkeys on the computers, right, writing hate comments, right? One, it's a reference to the monkeys typewriter thing where, you know, you get a million monkeys in a room, eventually one's going to write Shakespeare, right? But also, Lex could easily program bots to do it. But because he's petty, he just feels like it's an extra bit for him to have monkeys do it on a constant basis and to train other animals to essentially hate Superman and do it that way. Because it's more real that way, just slightly bit more real for him. And that's awesome. I thought it was great. And it is some kind of comic book bullshit that he would pull. We're already in a pocket dimension. How is having 100 monkeys like slightly beyond your suspension of disbelief? Alongside that pettiness, there's also the pettiness of him locking his ex-girlfriend, who is still in her prom dress, I think, in a prison cell as well. It's just a lot of small bits that establish the overarching type of character he is, and they do such a good job with it. Before we get more stuff in the pocket dimension, and we get a little time to rest from that, we get a moment with Jimmy where he's going to meet up with his special contact, who happens to be Eve from Luthor Corp. And apparently his big gripe with her is that her toes look weird, which is such a funny little thing, because I thought they would make like a play off of that later on, and you would see that like she legitimately had some sort of mutation going on or something like that. She might just be a completely normal person. And that makes the whole Jimmy character even funnier, because this whole movie is just him being mildly inconvenienced by the fact that this conventionally attractive woman is interested in him. A little overly interested in him, maybe. And depending on who you are, you know, it's a funny comedic exchange. Sometimes I do find myself feeling bad for characters like Eve. Like, she doesn't seem like a bad person necessarily, so it's like it's hard to always find the comedy in it. But again, that's just me being overly sensitive to some things. Like, you know, it's still a funny and enjoyable moment, right? And they play off of it a couple more times going forward. But then we get another trip back to the Justice Gang, and we get to see them interact a little bit more in their Hall of Justice, which is just basically an empty building right now because there's not much going on. Where Lois comes to visit and get some information, and we get some of the best bits of Guy Gardner being an idiot, which is so satisfying, with the hypno glasses explanation, which was a fun pull that I didn't expect them to use. But obviously, of course, knowing that James Gunn is a fan of superhero stuff, it's fun to see him pull random shit like that, for which I think is like, I think it's Silver Age, it could be Golden Age comic stuff, where he uses the hypno glasses as a basically like a MacGuffin magic explanation for the people who just won't believe that he's able to hide being Superman, right? Which is a nice little additional thing. But now we get to finally see more of Mr. Terrific, and him and Lois start to steal the show for a bit. I didn't know that Eddie had played Darwin in one of the previous X-Men movies, and that was one of those constantly talked about moments in superhero movies where they just completely misunderstood a character's abilities and powers or whatever like that. They completely jobbed him for no reason. And I'm really happy that he got another chance. I always love to see actors. Three things I love seeing is actors who love their characters, actors who get to come back and play a character they've loved after a long time, and actors who get a chance to redeem themselves in genres that they feel that they really love, you know, or if they were like if they got a bad hand, right? And he definitely did. And he did a phenomenal job as Mr. Terrific. I loved his performance throughout this. And again, I am not an expert on DC. I have seen Mr. Terrific maybe once or twice in animated series stuff, and that's it. And then I would constantly hear his name brought up in power scaling conversations about who the smartest characters in fiction are. And beyond that, had no idea who we were dealing with, and now I fully understand who I've been missing out on, and I'm so happy to add him to my list of characters I love. There's not a lot of black superheroes who aren't electricity based who get a lot of love, and I'm glad that Mr. Terrific is finally being added to that list of people that people are going to know off the top of their head, and that's awesome. And after a little argument between the Justice Gang, which is great, we get to see more of Mr. Terrific's no-nonsense personality against Guy's asshole personality. And Guy says like one thing about, I wish I a couple seconds away from forming a giant hammer and beating you two to death with it, which just made me think of like arguments I used to have at like 2 a.m. with my brother as we're supposed to be asleep. I was specifically doing a superhero bracket, and like the argument that I kept making was that Green Lantern could just beat anybody by forming the right object. And it's one of those things where it's like, that was like baby's first power scaling argument, right? Where it's like, technically we could argue for hours about this. That's just immediately what I thought of. I was like, oh yeah, well, he summons a giant hammer, it's over. Oh, he summons a giant steamroller, it's done. Stuff like that, you know, and it's great. But then Mr. Terrific's heading out with Lois because he wants to piss off Green Lantern. And we get like maybe the only joke I could argue maybe wasn't necessary, which is the slow garage joke, which I think is fine. It has room to breathe and I like it. It's just a small funny bit of like irony, you know, he's super high tech and his garage is slow, because of course some things are like that. And as they take off to go figure out what's up, we head back to Lex and Superman in the pocket dimension, and we get maybe one of the only scenes with Lex that I had had an argument back and forth with my girlfriend about after this movie. We watched the movie because she is someone who grew up watching the animated series, and I was somebody who grew up with like more video gamey Lex and a few comic runs here and there. But one thing that she had said that I also couldn't rebuttal is that it was weird to see Lex kill somebody. You don't usually see Lex Luthor get his own hands dirty. And I tried to think in my head if there was ever something in my like I could refute that with. But even recently, in stuff like Suicide Squad Kill the Justice League, where he has this massive exosuit where he could probably whoop ass with it, we don't see him do shit. He just sends us to do things for him. And then I kept thinking about it. I don't think I've ever seen Lex Luthor actually kill somebody. That's just not how he works. That's not his thing. He's a businessman. His optics would be bad, right? And so maybe the argument was that in the pocket dimension, if everything went to plan, nobody could have ever had evidence. There was no cameras or anybody to see that he had committed that murder. And therefore, he was willing to let himself be a little more open with it. Maybe. But the Russian roulette game feels a little more jokery, a little more other villainy than Lex. Lex feels like, or maybe having someone else play Russian roulette, or maybe having a robot that plays Russian roulette right there, but him pulling the trigger makes all that difference in a way that's a little weird for him, right? It doesn't pull me out of the movie and it doesn't ruin his character. It's just something that is weird when you think about it like that. But again, adding to the pettiness of Lex Luthor, the guy that he chooses to get to interrogate Superman with is the guy who helped him out of the hole in the ground back at the beginning, which now not only reinforces the part of the people caring about Superman in the way that he tells Superman not to tell him anything, he stands by him, but it also reinforces how much Superman cares about every single person and every individual, right? It could be just a random person. It doesn't matter if it's anybody that, it's not like a supervillain needs to grab somebody he cares about personally, like Peter Parker's loved ones, right? It's anybody could be the person right there, and Superman cares just as much. And that's a really good example of that. And this is what ends up triggering Metamorpho's human side, right? Like which is a great and realistic thing for him to be his breaking point, right? But before we get to see all that, we get to see the best fight scene in the movie, the best action sequence in the movie. And again, I don't point out shots and filming techniques like this often, but what I think they did here in this fight scene with Mr. Terrific, if you see from the midpoint of the fight where Lois is following the camera, I think you spend the majority of this fight scene in the perspective of one of his T-spheres, one of Mr. Terrific's T-spheres. We get to see one of the most effortless and smooth fight scenes in DC history, even, and one of the smoothest fights in a while in superhero movies, which is, most James Gunn movies have at least one really good fight sequence, and this was definitely that one. The moment we saw this, it immediately made me think of the hallway fight in Guardians 3, where I'm like, okay, cool, this is our sequence that we're supposed to nerd out and love, and we haven't even gotten to the big Superman fights yet, so I can't wait to see what else we've got, right? Mr. Terrific makes quick work of the people at the campsite in a way that's really enjoyable to watch, and it makes him feel super, super cool, and it's a really great introduction that will stick with people, and I'm very happy about that. Another weird little thing you'll notice in this fight is like the scientists feel like they're really supposed to be there, and they're kind of slightly fighting Mr. Terrific back alongside the Raptor guys. In reality, they should have totally just let the Raptor guys take the fight and just held back. I don't know what they were so invested in. We were trying to argue whether or not they knew what they were doing or were willingly doing the work they were doing. But I think when we were discussing it back and forth, I think we came to the conclusion that they just genuinely believe they're working for Luthor Corp. They don't think that they're doing anything specific beyond that. Most of them had not looked behind the curtain at the portal from what we can tell. Next, we get a huge little sequence with the portal and the Pocket Universe. Metamorphos finally willing to work with Superman to help get his kid back, who is across in the other cell, which is also with a guard that Lex, I assume, pays to just stay there for what would have been, I assume, eternity, and the guy was just cool with that. It didn't seem like he was another prisoner because he was willing to fight Superman back when he gets in there to take the baby. So who knows what that guy's story was. But it's really, really cool to get to see in that moment when Metamorpho takes the kryptonite away, and it's like, well, he needs energy from the sun, and there's no sun here. And at the same time, in my head, my girlfriend was thinking the same thing. In my head, I'm like, well, surely there's some. In my head, I was thinking, surely there's some rock that could radiate a similar radiation to solar radiation. And then she was thinking something similar, like he could totally just make something like that, right? he became so much more enjoyable of a character to me, to where I was like, okay, cool, this guy's sick. I can't wait to have him around for longer. And this entire action sequence from here onward in the pocket dimension is really, really cool. They spend the majority of the time playing with the fact that Superman's not at full power, right? So of course he can't just blow himself through to the exit somewhere, wherever it may be. And of course, playing with having the baby and having Metamorpho, who is getting weaker and weaker as the chase sequence goes on. It's really good. And when we get to the sequence where they're heading towards the black hole, you genuinely do get to a point where you're like, okay, cool, he's gonna be saved. When he gets to the point of calling Crypto and he's about to be sucked into the black hole, you genuinely do expect this to be the moment that Crypto gets on board. And the fact that they subvert that expectation not once, I don't even think it was twice, I think they did it 3 times throughout the movie, he's still a dog, right? And it's great. So then he pulls, Superman pulls something out of his bag that you didn't even expect, because I didn't expect him to be able to help himself for some reason, which is great. But of course he can. He's Superman, right? And even at 85%, he can save himself from being sucked into a black hole. That's just the kind of strength he's got, right? Such a cool sequence, and getting him out of there and get the fun comedy of Crypto chasing the T-Sphere to get out of there as well is a great explanation for getting him to find, like, to listen and behave within the time that they have. Everything feels tight and explained properly, and that's something that I loved about it. Jumping a little ahead here, because I could literally talk about every little bit and piece about it forever. We move on, we get a little bit of extra information from Eve to Jimmy, where she's getting ready to give him all of the information, and Lex finds Eve in the closet. This whole section of Lex at Luthor Corp is him at arguably his most evil in a way that's really enjoyable. The part that stood out to both of us was the part when he throws the pencil at Eve as and tells her to get out of the room, right? That is like evil, right? Where it's unnecessary. But the part that immediately stood out to me after that was the bit where they're done replacing the pencils in the cup and he just swats the cup back off the table like a cat. It's exactly like the characterization that I wanted for him from here on out. So him being a petty, whiny asshole is so good, and it can only get better as as his character progresses in the universe. But then we get to the exchange back and forth between Jimmy and Eve's getting ready to send him all the files, and Jimmy makes the biggest sacrifice in the entire movie and sacrifices his weekend in order to save Superman's life. Every scene with Jimmy in it is so enjoyable in a way I did not expect at all going into it. And I'm really glad that they did what they did with him. Jimmy in the empty Daily Planet building, really lamenting and deciding whether or not he wants to give up Superman's life to prevent himself from having to spend one weekend with this girl who doesn't even seem that bad, is so hilarious in a way that doesn't seem annoying, and I love that. And then we get what is probably my favorite section of this entire movie. About halfway, a little over halfway into the movie at this point, we finally get to see him take him back to Kent Farm. And we get to see Mom and Papa Kent. We get to see Lois look around Clark's childhood bedroom as his parents are like hunched over him, worried about him. It is not like they're hiding what they're trying to do for you, but you are literally seeing her see bits and pieces of that humanize him in a way that nobody would expect in that universe. If you looked at this random alien savior who's got all these powers and stuff like that, it would never cross your mind that they would grow up having a favorite band, that they would grow up having a school that they went to, that they would have posters on their wall or things that they were interested in. And all of that is given to you in that moment. And it's obvious that it's humanizing for her in the same way that it's humanizing for us, the audience, right? And they do such a good job with that. Pruitt Taylor Vince as John Kent does such a good job with so few words. You genuinely feel like this is some sad, super loving old country man. And it's so good. We'll get to the part that matters most later, but everything on Kent Farm is so good. The stakes finally start to rise, and we see that the portal starts to open remotely, and Lex is like, fuck it. If we ruin the world, we ruin the world. It doesn't matter to me, because I can just go to space. I don't know what his argument necessarily was. He had the pocket dimension, I guess. We get the quick escalation of what's going on, and then we cut back to Superman chilling outside without socks on, feet on the grass, which establishes he's from the country, but also to me, my immediate thought is like, why are you not wearing socks? But that's a me thing. I would be wearing socks in that environment. That's it. And again, Pruitt Taylor Vince with the best simple John Kent dialogue ever. about how parents aren't supposed to choose your fate. They're supposed to guide you. And he does such a good job. It doesn't feel like it's a forced dialogue. It doesn't feel like they're trying to recreate some great power comes great responsibility talk. It just genuinely feels like a dad talking to a son in a way that feels so good. And his face is so loving and sad in a way that makes you think like, man, I really am glad they're not killing this man this time. I want him to be around forever, right? And that's so good. It's such a good exchange to the point where it doesn't feel like, oh, they're pulling away from the action as it's starting to rise. It is a perfectly fine moment to be placed where it is, and it's so enjoyable to get. And I'm glad we got it. And for the final climax of the movie, we get the invasion of Jar-Ampor by Baravia, and we see some great allegory and symbolism as they're calling for Superman, you know, to stop them from doing this objectively evil action, this overly obviously evil action that shouldn't take explicit explanation to understand that is an evil action to take place. And no matter what the circumstances are, or where you are, or your level of fiction to nonfiction on scale. But we get the cut between that and the escalating tension as the rift in the ground is opening up in Metropolis. And we get to see this nice, comfortable evacuation that does a great job of establishing that, hey, nobody here is dying, we're getting everybody out of town, and everybody's getting to safety, because that's something we care about in this movie. One of the biggest things we care about is, as a superhero, is saving the lives, not killing the villain, which is amazing. It's so good. The lady who takes her turtle onto the bus or whatever, it seems dumb when you watch it at first and seems like a small joke, and then you realize, no, they're taking the time to explain, like, even the simplest of things, even the smallest of things, smallest of characters, smallest of people are being saved from this, just so nobody is unaccounted for. And in the middle of all this conflict, we get to see Perry sat down and listening to the brief from Jimmy and Lois, because of course he respects Lois. Lois is not going to stop him in the middle of all this bullshit just to give him nothing. Of course he's going to stop and listen to her, and that's so good. There's no unnecessary trying to fight the character who doesn't have time for this. It's great. They do such a good job. And these characters all feel like they're a family and they understand each other already. So the moment they get all the information there and he gets that last little bit tied together and he knows this is factual information, let's get it going. Like, that's it. They get it going, they get in the ship, and they get it written, and that's perfect. This is the perfect time to address this with Lois before I forget. This version of Lois Lane feels so much like the version of Lois Lane that I can picture in my head. It is amazing. She does such a good job. The most recent versions of Lois I'm thinking of is when we played Suicide Squad Kill the Justice League, which is on the second channel if you want to check that VOD out. Lois is literally the only living human reporting to no living humans in Metropolis, just being out and about, because her job to her is to report the information to the people. No matter how few people there are left, as long as she can give a little bit of hopeful information to people, that's all that matters to her. Same with in the Flashpoint movie, when she's in the middle of all of the bullshit, when speedsters and gods are flying around and fighting each other. She is still there reporting. And this Lois feels like she absolutely could hold her own in this situation. She feels like the exact kind of Lois Lane that could do all those things. And I'm very, very happy that they did that. And they did it in such a good way that it didn't feel questionable at all. You didn't question why she was at the portal. Every time I felt myself going, why was she here? My brain immediately went, nah, because she's like that. That's why. Lois is always like that. She's always there. It doesn't matter. It's not a questionable situation. And that was so enjoyable and so refreshing in a way that I don't think they ever really captured with the Amy Adams version of Lois Lane. And now, as the town's falling apart, we see one of the coolest scenes where Luthor Corp's building. We finally see why it's so funnily shaped. It's because, surprise, of course. Now, surprisingly, yet unsurprisingly, it's a ship in the center. Luthor's safe. He's always going to be safe somehow, right? And that's awesome. It feels so good, and again, it doesn't feel hard to believe at all. It's like, of course he would have that plan. If he's not freaking out, he's got a plan, and it's awesome. But then we get to see the buildings and the city start to fall apart, and everybody's beginning to evacuate, and we get the lady gets stuck on the bridge, and we get the best symbol is like that we get the best scene in or like we get the best like symbolic scene in the movie. One, letting this one lady get out of this, get out from under this building so that she can reach safety because she's the last person we need out of here. But also, as she gets out of there and he sets the building down, we get the awesome scene that I'm aware was in trailers of him rising up out of the dust. And it's not like he was trying to look cool. He just does look really awesome in that moment, and he feels heroic, and that's because he is. It's so good. And now we get into the final fight in the movie, which is with Ultraman and the engineer, and we get some of the most disgusting, like body horror like way to fight Superman ever, where the engineer starts to fill his lungs and body with the nanites. And the moment Lex tells the guy to press a button or whatever in the Luthor Corps building, I genuinely thought the goal was to expand rapidly the moment, like at that moment. Of course, I don't think you can pierce Superman's lungs like that, but you can, I guess their goal was to stop him from breathing, which you might be able to do. It didn't seem like they did a great job. But the whole fight is tense, not necessarily because of the fact whether or not he'll survive the fight, which you do think about for a second, but it's mostly how is he going to get all the way to Jarinpur right now? That's the stress that you're worried about. They're slowly getting ready to invade, and these kids are holding this flag up, and it's so stressful knowing that they're holding him back, right? Because realistically, at the end of the day, it's not whether they're going to beat him, it's just how long they're going to hold him for. But as Superman takes care of the engineer, and by what I thought was going to be burning up on re-entry, but really is just a super hard impact on re-entry, we then get the reveal for Ultraman, which I had not thought about until the moment the mask was ready to come off. The moment that the mask was broken and we saw that it was about to come off, in my head, I immediately ran through a bunch of different things. Because I was thinking, well, there's nobody they have shown us before that could be a big reveal behind this mask. Like, the only other person it could have been was Bizarro, or another version of clone Superman, right? Because it wasn't going to be Ultraman that's like slightly different looking Superman from the animated series, because they wouldn't be doing this reveal here. But when he took the mask off, it was kind of hard to tell at first that it was him. But I thought it looked cool. They did a really good job. I thought it didn't, and in that moment I was like, okay, it's not the end of the world that it's the same fight, because we've got the extra added bonus of Lex being in control, right? And he's not, and then that added caveat of Ultraman not being very smart, which is a really good way to set it up. And then finally, as you see them continue to fight Superman, and you're questioning how the fuck is he going to solve this problem, the movie reminds you that he has friends, which is so good, because then the Justice Gang shows up in a way that I genuinely did not think about. I don't know why I didn't think about it, but for some reason they did such a good job of distracting me from the fact that he could have called for help. And then this movie did it again and reminded us there's other superheroes in this universe. And it's so good. They do such a good job with that. And Metamorpho's a part of the strike team as well. And that's so good. He looks so cool. And then we cut back to the fight scene with Superman and Ultraman, and we get the best emotional moment from Lex Luthor where he talks about just how much he despises Superman. And we get the 1A scene where he's taking out his anger over the comms on him. But then he calls for Crypto, and the main thing that solves this whole fight is something that's been set up the whole movie. Again, this movie feels really tight with its plot points. The bit with Crypto and the T-Spheres ends up being the thing that solves the problem, right? The cameras are gone. Now there's nothing he can do. They do such a good job of making Crypto relevant throughout the entire movie in a way that doesn't feel forced at all. And then it's just pure fan service from then on. Now that he has the upper hand, he's out of there. And we get to see some amazing showcase of Superman's abilities, including the spin move that I thought was so enjoyable and comically fun that and I understand you wouldn't normally give it to a character because that would make them seem too powerful, but with Superman you finally don't have to worry about that, and it's so good. And to finish things off, after he sends Ultraman into the black hole, who may inevitably become Bizarro somehow due to that, maybe, he's ready to take off for Luthor, And the confrontation between him and Luthor is so good, and we finally get to tie off that big emotional bit of Superman being human and making mistakes and being flawed and not being perfect, which we've been building up this whole movie. But this part right before we get to this speech, where he's flying directly through the point blank sunlight and you don't see any of him until it's too late, is such a good shot that they use a couple more times in this movie. I can't quite remember exactly where, but this blown out sunlight effect is so good for him in a way I've never thought of before. It feels so Superman. It feels so unique, and I love it. And as they're tying up the dialogue, Crypto attacks Luthor and uses him as a chew toy really quickly in a scene that some people say kind of takes things away from the emotional moment. I could see that argument a little bit. I thought it was a little bit like, maybe bit much, but it's also good to see Luthor get a little bit of damage because Superman's not going to do it, right? So it feels good to see him take a little bit of a beating. But then Mr. Terrific hacks the console and starts putting the world back together slowly, and we start wrapping things up, and we get some nice ties off. Lois and Jimmy's work worked out, and the stories reached all the news channels, and now Lex is well known as a criminal and a traitor, which is very interesting because it's weird to take away all of Lex's status super quickly. I'm very interested to see what that means going forward. I mean, it's not unlikely that he could slowly build his way back up somehow, some way, but it's harder when he's fully globally scrutinized against, right? But then we get to see Metamorpho joins the Justice Gang because he likes the name, and which is a very guy thing, right? Like, it's just purely to tie the vote for himself now. And now everybody's free to come home from the pocket dimension, and we get one of the funniest lines in the movie. Get his bald ass to Belle Reve, which is such a good moment. It's a nice name call out to Belle Reve, which is a prison we've seen in Suicide Squad, but also just a fun line that you could almost feel like the actor felt like he had fun saying. And we finally get to tie it off at the end here with a little romantic scene between Lois and Clark as they, Clark as Superman, as they walk away to do their little interview, and they have their moment together where Lois finally completes the I love you that Clark gave her at the beginning of the movie or earlier on in the movie, which is great. It's great not having them be together and not having them be a thing throughout the movie. The whole movie, Lois is essentially deciding whether or not she does like him or love him or want to be with him. They're not even in a relationship yet. Some people were complaining that there wasn't quite enough establishment of the relationship or anything like that, but there was no relationship to establish until the end of the movie. They aren't together until the movie ends. That is when they decided. Her talking to Mr. Terrific is a great establishing point that tells you, yes, they're not quite together, and that I love you at the end is what seals the deal. And then we also get the little cutaway to the rest of the Daily Planet. We're like, how long has that been going on? And it's great. It's another one of those like, okay, cool. We're skipping a little bit of that. Do they know? Do they not know bullshit? And it's nice to go straight into like, yeah, okay, cool. We're all just gonna let them do that without us talking about it and see how long they think they're hiding it from us. And that's great. It doesn't take away from the moment at all. It just adds to the universe a little bit, and that's really. And then at the end, we get a little bit of Superman getting patched up at the Fortress of Solitude, where he's talking with number 4, or Gary, who's voiced by Alan Tudyk, who is a great robot voice actor. Who's showing a bit of his humanity, which is awesome. I know James Gunn talked about it in an interview where he's like, these Superman robots do have humanity and do feel emotions and do feel things. They just don't, they just won't acknowledge that for whatever reason, which is really good. It's just fun to give them that little bit of life, because everything to Superman, if not to Superman, or everything in the world, if not in the world, at least to Superman, has a life and a value in a person. And that's great. And then to finish it off, we get a surprise reveal of Millie Alcock as Supergirl, who is in a drunken state, or like a hungover state, as she's come back from partying on some red sun planet, which is a great little bit of characterization and gives us a really cool like juxtaposition of character for who we're going to be meeting and interacting with next. And it's so good. I'm very excited to see what they do in this universe with Supergirl, because there's a lot of fun things that Supergirl's experienced over the years, and she's been getting a lot of love lately, obviously with the CW show and stuff like that. But it'll just be a lot of fun to see where they choose to go with her. Fun little bit of information you get is that Crypto is her dog, and that's why Crypto's so rough and loose with everybody, is because she has no care for it, because she can take it. It's so good. It's so good to see that. That's a nice little thing that ties it off and completely recontextualizes the movie if you watch it a second time, about Crypto in terms of how they interact with each other, Clark and Crypto. And it just does a great job of getting you interested in the character that we're about to meet next in the next big movie, without making it feel like a big credit drop or anything like that. And we finish it off with him viewing some images of his parents raising him on on Kent Farm, And I think that, and it's great. It's such a great moment that, like, and you know, it's what you kind of know it's what's about to happen when they say, "Shall we play images of your parents or video of your parents or whatever?" But it's still really good. Just a great way to end it off and showcase like the big change from beginning to end. You know, it's all about how human Superman is, and this is a perfect way to finish it off. They do such a good job from beginning to end of making it feel like a feel-good superhero movie that you really enjoy, and that's exactly what we wanted. We got a hopeful, enjoyable, bright in in every aspect of the word, and fun Superman movie that establishes a universe that is so different from Marvel in so many good ways that it's going to make us love coming back to see all the other projects they have going on in the universe. This movie was phenomenal. I love superhero movies. I love watching them build their extended universes, and I love, love, love when they get it right and when people love what they do, especially in this specific industry. And I think this Superman movie is a great example of that. James Gunn has always been someone in these superhero movies who feels like he loves what he does and the media he's working with and the media he's converting. And that's something that I love as somebody who loves superheroes and comics. Even if I don't read every single comic on the shelf, I love them as a medium and appreciate when somebody cares enough to give it the respect it deserves when they're converting it into these movies. And they're not just trying to make the cheap blockbusters that Sony was giving us for a bit with Morbius and Craven and Madam Web and all those. Either way, I hope this is a big sign of huge, huge good things to come for DC. I can happily say that I'm excited for the next DC movie to come out, and I hope I continue to say that for at least another 10 movies going forward. I'm very excited to see what else they have going on. Really quickly, for final closing thoughts, because I've been talking about this movie for 2 hours now, which is the runtime of the movie. This was so enjoyable of an experience, and I'm glad that there isn't a single bit that I accidentally had spoiled for myself due to marketing. And I feel like this is a big issue, especially, and it will probably be a bigger issue as the DC universe moves forward, is marketing spoiling things to get people in seats, right? We went to see this Superman movie in the theater at whatever time it was. The showing I want to say was at 12, right? The showing was at like 12 noon. We got there at 12:10, 12:15 because I have been trying my hardest to avoid trailers. They show trailers up until the movie, you know, at the start time because everybody's in there with their concessions, and then they play it for commercials for a little bit, right? And then they give you the bit where if you're at Regal, they give you the bit where you're doing the roller coaster, and they're like, "All right, welcome to Regal. Silence your cell phones. Here we go," right? For this movie, we got there as as they're still doing previews. We sit down, they do one more preview, and then they do the roller coaster for, all right, here we go, silence your cell phones, let's do this. And then for another 15 minutes, they played more trailers, and all the trailers I was trying to avoid were in there, including Fantastic Four, which played the most egregious trailer I've ever heard in my life. Every time a trailer goes off in the theaters, I'm the only person in the theater like this, by the way, so anybody can look over and they'll see me doing this. I've got my eyes closed, I've got my hands over my ears, like, and I'm very lightly trying not to be annoying, but I'm trying to avoid hearing anything. Like, I'm over here cowering, trying to have my eyes closed, cover my ears, and I can't successfully cover my ears enough because it's an IMAX theater, so of course I'm going to hear the words. And so I've gotten like 7 bits and pieces of the Fantastic Four movie spoiled for me before watching Superman. And what doesn't make sense to me is, why are you advertising superhero movies before a superhero movie? If I'm watching Superman, I'm probably going to watch Fantastic Four. Why would you do that? And why would you spoil the entire plot? If I'm watching Superman, chances are I know superheroes. So of course I'm going to know everything you just said. It's so dumb. There was like 2 good comedic relief jokes that could have been left for the movie that I would have loved, and would have been like cool little bits and pieces that I already know about what they've got going on. And then 2 or 3 plot points from the movie, genuine plot points from the movie that I was hoping I would never hear about until the movie happened, were spoiled for me in that moment. And the same thing was happening with Superman until I tried my absolute hardest to block and hide everything to do with Superman marketing, which sucked because I follow James Gunn, which makes it hard because I want to see what he's working on and what he's announcing, but I don't want to see the trailers for the stuff that's coming out. You're not improving the people going to the seats in the theaters by showing off more of the movie. That's not how it works. Either the movie's good or it's not, and then you get more people interested in seeing it in theaters. But I'm not going to see it I'm more likely to not see it in theaters because I know too much about it than I am to see it in theaters because you showed me everything about the movie. It's so baffling to me. And I really hope it stops soon, because if it keeps happening moving forward, there's going to be a point where I just can't see these movies in theaters anymore. I'm not going to be able to, because it's going to ruin the experience. I'm going to have to like wait for someone to text me to come into the theater or some shit. Like, it's going to be so annoying trying to dodge these trailers moving forward. And it's going to be even worse when we get to the big Marvel movies that are set to come out in the next couple of years. But anyways, I really, really, really enjoyed Superman. I'm very happy for the DC universe, and I can't wait to see what we have coming forward. I know we've got Lanterns, we've got Supergirl, we've got a Batman Brave and the Bold thing going on. I'm very excited for all that to come out, and I can't wait. I'm not going to give like a number review for the movie, because number reviews don't mean anything, especially not from me. But it is an amazing movie, and if you like superheroes, I would say go see it. If you don't like superheroes and you just want a feel-good, like, action-y movie, it will probably still scratch your itch, but I feel like you'll find yourself walking away enjoying Superman as a character anyway, and that's something that I feel like is hard to say about other Superman movies in the recent years. I think you're doing yourself a big disservice if you miss it, especially if you're already watching Marvel movies as is. But I cannot stress enough, please enjoy it in any way that you can. This was also the outfit I wore to the theater. The shirt's super big, but I wanted something that had red, blue, and yellow, and I was just super excited to throw something on that I could sit and wear, and I thought it captured every color we've got. So that was fun for me. But anyways, thank you to anybody who watched this far into the video of my review of Superman, the 2025 movie by James Gunn. I'm very excited to see what we have moving forward. If you are interested in if you're interested in superhero stuff, feel free to subscribe to this channel, because I have a video coming out soon where we'll talk about the 90s Spider-Man TV show and how it got me into superheroes to begin with, and we'll cover the entire show from beginning to end. And I can't wait to talk about that, because that's been a big thing that I've always wanted to explain and explore, and also a great time for me to go back and revisit that and get to see bits and pieces I may have missed when I was a kid, because I was just watching reruns. You couldn't always catch every episode, right? Also, if you're watching this on a Monday, Wednesday, or Friday, go ahead and check out the Twitch channel VictoryTGH on Twitch, twitch.tv/VictoryTGH. I'm live every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday from 5:30 to 9:30 PST. And if you're interested in checking out what we're doing on live streams, or you're not sold yet and you don't want to go to Twitch for sure, go check out the second channel, Victory Live, here on YouTube, where you'll see all the VODs for the past 2 years. We stream every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday. We have done so since the start of 2024, and we will continue to into 2026 onward. I'm very excited to continue doing that. We've been playing a lot of superhero games. Right now, we've been playing a little bit of Rockstar games and Rivals every single stream. We play a little bit of Rivals at the end of the day. Check back on this channel soon. Subscribe so you're getting notifications when we start uploading on this channel more. I'm almost free from my second job, which means it'll just be my 9 to 5 and this, which means I can edit again, which means we'll be doing a lot more content where we'll be talking more about stuff like this, and we'll all be talking more about games and stuff like that, and I can't wait to go in depth on some more stuff. And I've got some big projects that I can't wait to make down the line as well, that are finally going to grace this channel, that have been sitting and stewing in my brain forever. So thank you to anybody who watched this far in the video. If you watched this far in the video, comment your favorite superhero run in DC or Marvel, and if you don't have a comic run that you love, comment your favorite animated piece of media, favorite show, movie, whatever, what have you. Put it in there, and I can't wait to check it out in the comments and hear what you say. Tell me what you like about it too, and interact with other people's in there, see if they have stuff you like, and see if you find something that you might like of a character you've never seen before. If you're brand new and interested in Superman, I highly recommend you check out this specific comic series right here. This would be the Joshua Williamson's Dawn of DC Superman run, which is one of the more recent year comic runs of Superman. I think it does a really good job of showing off more of that enjoyable, hopeful Superman that we know and love. And if you're interested in a non-comic version and you haven't seen this yet, I would highly recommend you check out My Adventures with Superman, the TV show, which also does a really good job of showcasing Superman stuff. And if you're looking for specifically live action, I also believe that the Superman and Lois TV show is a great one as well. That's gonna be it for me today. Thank you to everybody who tuned into the video. I'll see you guys again real soon. I can't wait to get back to uploading on this channel consistently, at least once a month moving forward from September onward. I'll see you guys real soon. Take care, and